James Lupton. I'm delighted to be joined yet again with Jackie Kallen. Jackie, how are you?
I'm wonderful, as always. So happy to talk to you.
Fantastic pleasure. Thank you very much for coming back on the show again. Last time we had you on, we spoke about James Toney. Today, we're going to talk about Thomas Hearns, the hitman. Just talking a little bit about Thomas, how you first met Thomas Hearns.
Well, I was a reporter for a daily paper here, and I was mostly covering entertainment for the first maybe 10 years or so. I covered the Academy Awards, the Tony, the Grammys. I interviewed celebrities that came to town, actors, actresses, musicians, anybody like that. And at that point, our sports editor had an opening. They needed somebody to cover sports. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So they sent me to interview, among other people, a young boxer who had just turned pro. He was 19 years old. He was skinny as all get out. I mean, he had a big upper body, but he had these little legs. And his name was Thomas Hearns. And he was a 4-round fighter at the time, but he seemed to be knocking everybody out. He had quite a right hand. So I went to watch him fight, and it was the first time I'd ever been at a live boxing event. So I was pretty fascinated by it. And more than just the excitement of the fight and the crowd, I was quite taken by Tommy Hearns. Even though he was still a teenager, a young guy, he had such intensity in him. I mean, he would stare at his opponent, and I don't know how the opponent didn't faint dead away right there. I mean, he was so deadly and so mean. And then afterwards, he hugged the guy. He came out of the ring. He was hugging his mom, and I thought, is that the same guy? I mean, he just ripped this guy's head off, and now he's laughing and so kind. So I wanted to get to know what really made him the way he was, which I found out there's many fighters that have that dichotomy where they can be one thing in the ring and another out of the ring. So afterwards, after I did, my report of the fight, I went back and did an interview with him. And I mean, I was just hooked on the sport, and, just thought Tommy was the sweetest guy I ever met.
Do you, out of interest, remember the headline for the fight report?
Do I what?
Do you remember the headline for the fight report that you wrote?
Oh gosh, no. I mean, it was 45 years ago. I don't know what I ate yesterday. You're really, really pushing me here. Um, but it was something to the effect of, skinny but powerful, something that, meek but mighty. It was something like that, comparing his personality and his slim stature to the power that he had. And at that time, I started interviewing other people at the Kronk gym, which included Emmanuel Stewart, his trainer and his manager, and Hilmer Kenty, who was another fighter at the gym, and Mickey Goodwin, who was another fighter at the gym. And at that point, Emmanuel Stewart offered me the job as publicist, to come to work for the gym, to publicize these fighters, to do their press kits, to set up photo sessions, to set up press conferences, weigh-ins, things like that. So that was 1978. So of course I just leapt at the chance and said, absolutely, I would love this. So now here I am, this, kind of white suburban woman from, a very affluent suburb, driving down to the inner city to this hot gym down in the basement of a recreation center, and complete with cockroaches and all kinds of things I was very unfamiliar with. And I loved it. None of my friends could even understand what I was doing down there, but I loved it. And the guys were just so sweet and so welcoming to me, considering that I was an anomaly to them. Here's all these mostly African American guys. I think there was one trainer that was white and one fighter that was white, and then me. So it was a real mixed bag, but I felt welcome right from the beginning. And Tommy and I gradually formed a trusting relationship. Um, Little by little, he opened up. And I'd say within 6 to 8 months, we were on really good terms. After the first year, we were like buddies. And now after 45 years, he's like a brother. he's family. We go to each other's kids' weddings. We both have grandchildren. We go to each other's birthday celebrations. We go to lunch regularly just to get together. So we formed a beautiful friendship.
What's it like? How nice is it to look back and, from how it started was you just took the opportunity to do a fight report, really. That's what it was
Mhm.
used, never interested in boxing as such, never been to a boxing event before, like you say. And just by pure chance, 45 years later, good friends with one of the greatest fighters to have lived. And he's only one of many as well, with yourself and your network of friends. What's it like to look back and, have that friendship blossom from a professional capacity?
It's funny you say that because night before last, we had a birthday party for him for his 64th birthday. And, I've known him more than half my life and certainly two-thirds of his. And we had a very big celebration at a very popular restaurant around here. And everybody, you think of what am I going to get him? For me, especially because we've celebrated so many birthdays together. So this year I had a beautiful frame made and engraved. It says Thomas and Jackie, best friends. And I put in a really nice picture of us. And we took a lot of pictures together with he and I in the picture. And it just kind of was nice to look back and think that we've come so far, marriages, divorces, deaths in the family, like I said before, grandchildren. Um, Traveling to different countries together. It's just he really is like a brother from another mother. We're a decade apart. I'm older than him by a decade, but we've formed such a strong bond that I don't think of him as merely a friend. I just think of him as part of my family, and I feel that way. He has 8 brothers and sisters, well 7 now, one passed, but you know we're all connected after all these years.
Just want to touch lastly on his fighting career. And also, you work with him as a publicist, like you say, at Kronk Gym. You say he had the intensity, he had that stare down. He had, just almost, he would put the fear into his opponents. And he was deadly in the ring as well. He was very, very dangerous, heavy hitting. What was he like to work with and to, be a publicist for, to try and, market this fighter? What was it like?
It was tough at times because he didn't always love interviews. He's very shy by nature, and he's not extremely outgoing when it comes to doing interviews. He is now, after all these years, he's gotten pretty savvy. But at the beginning, he was so quiet, and he's soft spoken, so he would look down and in his lap and answer very, 1 or 2 word answers, and I would always say, "Come on, give him more time. Why don't you tell him about this time or this?" When I was there, I could prod him, and help him, but there were difficult times. I remember before the first Ray Leonard fight, which was 81, we were able to get a story with People Magazine, big deal, People Magazine. So they sent out a reporter and a photographer. We set up a time at the gym to do the interview, and he didn't show. And I called him and was really upset. And I said, "Tommy, we have People Magazine here. They're waiting for you." He said, "I'm not coming." And I said, "How can you stand up People Magazine?" He said, "I don't care who they are. I'm not coming." So I said, "Well, how about we do it later? We'll set something up maybe at my house." And he said, "Okay, I'll be there around 6." He never showed. So now I'm panicking because I have this photographer and writer from People Magazine at my house. So I realized that Tommy gets up early in the morning and goes fishing a lot of days. So I said to him, "What time are you going fishing tomorrow?" He said, 6 o'clock. So, okay, we'll be there. So we got up, all of us. They picked me up at 5 o'clock. We went out to the lake where he was fishing. We all got on the boat with him. And that's how they got their story on the fishing boat at 6 in the morning the next day. But that's the kind of thing I had to do in order to get the publicity we needed because sometimes he just wasn't up for it.
You mentioned he only done the interview because you went with him fishing. Did you find when you put him, say, in his comfort zone or somewhere he was, more at ease, did you find that it was easier to have other people work with him in that capacity?
100%. And that's how I evolved into the kind of publicist that worked around his personality and his schedule, which helped me for all the fighters I worked with after that, because I did publicity for Jerry Cooney and, other fighters that weren't in the Kronk circle. And I tried to learn each one's personality. Are they a morning person? Do they like to get up and do these interviews early? Do they like to do them after the workout at the gym? What's a good angle on their story? One guy raised chinchillas. Well, let's do it at his house and let's look at his chinchillas. Another guy, would like to do archery. Well, let's meet him at the range. All different things. I would try to find out something unique about the person I was working with so that I had an angle to give the writer. Well, here's an angle that hasn't been explored before. Or he's a great chef. Why don't we do the interview in my kitchen and have him make you something? So, as a good publicist, you have to make your subject interesting. Most of mine were, but not all. So, it was up to me to create interest where there might not have been any. And then as I graduated, I did that for 10 years. So it was up to me to come up with things to make my fighters interesting. I remember before Tommy fought Ray Leonard, there was a fight, I think it was in, where was it? Might have been Atlanta. And we had Tommy go down to one of Ray's fights and take a rubber chicken and throw it in the ring after the fight to imply that he was too afraid to fight Tommy. So we would come up with little angles that might get stories written. And then after 10 years, that's when I started managing my own fighters. So I wasn't doing the publicity anymore. But I loved being a publicist. It was challenging, it was fun. And I just loved the creativity of it.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, how Tommy's very shy. He wasn't very good at doing the interviews. And it took about 6 to 8 months for yourself to really blossom this friendship you now have. What was Tommy like with you in the early days, the first 6 months, let's say? Was there ever any struggles between the pair?
I wouldn't call them struggles, but he was very withdrawn. He was very quiet around me, and he was always watching me. I'd be doing my thing. We'd be at a press conference or something, and he'd be sitting there very quietly, and he would just be watching me with those really intense headlights. And he was feeling me out. It was my impression that as a 19, 20-year-old Black man from the inner city, he didn't have a lot of experience around white suburban women. I was just a completely different animal. I was from a completely different background. And I think maybe he was shy. He didn't know how to talk to me. He wasn't sure what were our common interests. He didn't know much about my life. And I don't know if he thought I knew much about his life. So it took a few months of just hanging out together for him to see that really we're more alike than different. We laughed at the same things, and he could see my interest in him and in boxing was genuine. And I think a level of trust developed. And and I was always very friendly and interested in his siblings and his mother. And I think if you're genuinely interested in somebody and you display that, that builds trust. And our friendship built and it built and it built. And by the time he won his first title here in 1980, we were really close. And once he won his title, we went shopping for jewelry and shopping for a Corvette. And eventually he went and bought his first Rolls Royce with me. And, we started doing things together like a family member might do with another family member, look for a house, things like that. So it developed into a very deep friendship, certainly nothing like it is today, but 4 decades of experiences builds a very strong bond. But I would say within the first couple of years, we were really tight buddies.
Fantastic. He was one of the four kings: Tommy Hearns,
Yeah.
Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Now, these days, we don't seem to see the best want to fight the best, and it's very frustrating to see that these days. But back then, it wasn't about money; it was about being the best, in my opinion. What was that like to be involved in that era, especially around with Tommy? And what was he like around, or when those other guys' names were mentioned, or when he fought those guys?
Well, Tommy was always extremely respectful of the other three because they were all four of them pretty equal. on a par as far as being able to mix it up together. And I don't think it was as much about money with them. Of course it was, but it was about the pride. If each could beat the other, there was a pride involved. Now, Ray, of course, beat Tommy the first fight. It was a 15-round fight. Tommy was definitely ahead by the 12th round, but at that point in time, they were 15-round fights. That gave Leonard the last 3 rounds to come back and eventually win. The second fight, Tommy clearly won. For some reason, they called it a draw, but even Ray will tell you today Tommy won the second fight. But I was at all the fights, and I think there were 9 altogether between the 4 of them. And today, although Marvin's not with us, Ray and Tommy get together often, and there's such a unique friendship there. There's such a strong connection that they're part of history together. And we don't see that today because I find today's fighters are a lot more select in who they fight. Why haven't we seen, Earl Spence fight Crawford? Why haven't we seen a lot of these big fighters fight each other? No one wants their O to go. Nobody wants to give up being undefeated. Nobody wants to give up their stature. And they don't realize that by fighting each other, they might up their stature, in a classic fight. But it's a different era. I think the fighters today are a different ilk. I can't answer why they don't do more of the trilogies and more of the classic matchups. I wish they did.
I mean, a lot of people say it's the Mayweather effect, obviously retired, undefeated, as you mentioned, protecting your own. But you could say the same about the last generation. They could have looked at Rocky Marciano, for example, and say, I want to protect my because of Rocky Marciano, and he'd done it. But it didn't seem to be the mindset. It's a different mentality between the two generations, almost worlds apart, really, with the stature fighters. And like you say, the fights they took on, especially those for the Four Kings, that goes down in history, like you say. What was Tommy's mindset and mentality like towards fighting?
He was a very serious opponent. When he had a fight coming up, he was very serious. The day of the fight, I didn't even like to approach him or talk to him too much. I like to let him be because he got in his zone. There are fighters like that. Some fighters can go to the mall, hang out with their family the day of the fight, and then get in the ring and turn in a great performance. Tommy was always, kind of reclusive that day. He wanted to focus. And, of course, making weight can make you pretty cranky. After the weigh-in, of course, you can eat and drink and rehydrate. But the last few days before a fight, I think Tommy was very focused. So I just learned to let him just do his thing and get ready before a fight. Other fighters, you can, joke around, take pictures, hang out, and do stuff all the way up to fight time. Tommy was always very focused. So I knew to just give him his space. Also, he wasn't too particular about seeing tapes. Back in the day, they didn't have YouTube. You could have just go online and look at your opponent and watch him in other fights. We had to pay to buy fight tapes from people that might have a tape of someone that fought previously against that opponent. But it was really hard to get an idea who you were fighting. And Tommy didn't care. He just didn't care. He just said, line them up. He went in and fought them his way. He felt that however that opponent might have fought someone else was not how they were going to fight him. So that might not even help him any. He wanted to just adapt to the fighter when he got in the ring with him. So I thought that was pretty smart because he didn't have any preconceived notions or ideas about how that fighter was going to come at him, whether he was going to come charging at the first bell or whether he was going to feel him out the first round. He just went in there blind and figured it out himself. And I think that's the best way. It certainly worked for him.
Absolutely. As you know, I like to always end these with the personalities and the fighters outside of the ring. Tell me your favorite memory with Tommy.
There are so many in 45 years that, we've shared so many experiences. Certainly, he was at both of my sons' bar mitzvahs when they turned 13. He was at my son's wedding. Um, we've gone to carnivals and fairs together in town. We go to charity events. I think one of my favorite memories is he and I promoted a fight together a few years ago before COVID, and working together with him and putting this whole event together and working on a daily basis with him was just so great. And to see both our names up there as the co-promoters of this big event was a culmination of so many years of working together and being friends that, just seeing our names on the marquee up there together was a lovely, brilliant night. So, again, there's so many. How do you pick a favorite moment out of 45 years? They've all been wonderful.
Absolutely, plenty there as well for you to look back on and reflect on. Has Tommy ever done anything that has surprised you?
I think what surprised me was after the loss to Marvin Hagler, he went into a shell. I didn't expect him because he'd already experienced the loss to Ray Leonard, but it was so much harder after the Hagler fight. He didn't come out of his house for days. I couldn't get him to do interviews. I couldn't get him to come out to lunch with me. I couldn't get him to open the door, even just to visit. I had to write him a very long letter and leave it with him so that he would read it and see how I felt, that he was still the champ to me, and that, this loss didn't define his career. It was just a moment in time. It was three very exciting rounds, and that losing is a part of any sport. It's a part of life. And he read the letter, and then of course we got together after that. But I was surprised at how hard it hit him. And I think that was the hardest loss he ever took, was that the loss to Marvin Hagler. To this day, I think he would love to have had a second chance.
Definitely. And the last question from me, Jackie, is there anything that Tommy does today or anything similar that he'd done when he was 19 when you first met him in the early days?
Can you rephrase that again for me? Say it in a
Yeah.
different way.
Any sort of characteristics or anything that he'd done, whether it be hobby wise or something that he was really passionate about? Is this something that he has had stick with him the whole time you've known him?
When you put it that way, yes. Tommy went through a phase where he had to have all these exotic animals. So there was a time when I would take him shopping, he had to have a cougar, a pet cougar. And we finally got, this is when you were allowed to have it. I don't think you can anymore unless you're a zoo, but he had this cougar, and we built a special room for it with a glass wall so he could watch the cougar play. And the cougar went crazy and was attacked the dog, and then he had to have a monkey. So we had this crazy monkey named Junior, who was like all over the place, jumped everywhere, was always masturbating all day long. The monkey sat there, I don't know what his problem was. He had this thing about having exotic pets that did not work out well. So thankfully, now that he's 64 years old, he has children and grandchildren to replace his fetish for crazy pets. So that's something I'm grateful for.
Fantastic. Well, Jackie, I want to thank you very much for your time again. So it's an absolute pleasure as always.
Oh, anytime. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.